Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Jen Fagan-Fry. I am the Institutional Repository Manager, and I want to thank everyone for joining us for our new series, our new brown bag series called Publishing at NOAA. I wanted to, before we get into what our topic today, I just sort of wanted to go over why we opted to start this new series. As many of you may or may not know, the library has started late last year a publications group. It's a number of us within the library system at NOAA and also a number of you folks who deal with technical editing or authors or handle publications within the labs and offices and programs. And what we do is we get together on a bi-monthly basis and we discuss issues in terms of publishing within NOAA. So open access issues, submissions to the repository, how to deal with 508 compliance, the best way to identify a predatory journal, things of that nature. And something that keeps coming up often is that a lot of people have a lot of questions and they just aren't getting this information on a regular basis. So one way to address that we thought of is to start a new series. So the other impetus for starting this series is, I'm sure most of you saw recently, I had sent out a survey about utilizing the institutional repository. Many of you took that, actually a ton of people took it, and thank you all for those who did participate. And I got a lot of wonderful feedback. And one of the things on there was that a lot of people just are unaware of the IR, its functions, how it fits into the publishing process within NOAA. And so we thought this was a really great opportunity to bring sort of those two needs for information together to create this new series where we can cover all aspects of publishing from start to finish. So whether it's research services that the library can offer you or softwares that we offer or NOAA offers that you can utilize in the research process, all the way through publishing, identifying journals, the process of preserving something for long-term preservation for something in the IR, and even all the way through NARA records management requirements. So that's sort of where this series is coming from. We plan to do this every second Thursday of each month. From now and at least through September is what we currently have scheduled. Once we get a little bit further into the series, we'll start moving on with additional programs after September. So as we go through these the next couple months, if you have an idea or a topic you'd like us to cover, please let us know. We are always open to feedback and we want to make sure we're providing you folks with the information that you need. So with that, today we are going to talk about the institutional repository. I will be speaking today as well as my colleague Sarah Davis. She is the Senior Bibliometrics Librarian at the NOAA Central Library. And again, we're going to cover the IR, sort of the whole process, what it is, why we have it, how it fits into the publishing process, how you can get things in there. We do have a couple announcements throughout the presentation that I think hopefully everyone will be very excited about. We're excited about these things. So with that, I'm going to toss it over to Sarah to start us off.
Hi. So if we want to start with the first slide. Thank you, Jen. So NOAA publishes a great deal, both about NOAA research and about operations. So these publications include data sets, gray literature, including annual reports, tech memos, white papers, other sort of official documents, also peer-reviewed journal articles, which includes papers from NOAA federal and contract staff and by extramural authors who received NOAA funding for their research. This includes Cooperative Institute authors and Sea Grant authors. There's also presentations and ephemera like posters and brochures and other publications that tend to be less formal. Next slide. Jen, thank you. So the scholarly communication process in general is very cyclic in nature. It starts with research and data collection, and analysis of that data. This is then transformed into a report or article, and at this point goes through the submission and peer review phase. At NOAA, this means the FRC review and approval process, and in the case of journal articles, submitting to a journal, where it then goes through another phase of external peer review. Only after all that is done is the research published and becomes a true publication. And increasingly, this is an online-only effort, although there are still some physical print publications. Once published, an article can then be disseminated and made available for discovery through various indexes, websites, Google, other tools. And ideally, it's archived so that an authoritative version is available in perpetuity. And at this point, that publication becomes a source of data and information to inform future publications, and the cycle starts all over again. Next slide. So NOAA has a number of mandates, policies, and guidelines related to this process. And we don't have time today to go through all of them in great detail because there's quite a few. But the most important to know are the framework for review and approval of FRCs and the NOAA PAR plan, which apply to all line office, as do various NOAA administrative orders regarding publications, data, scientific integrity, and a couple more. And there's also guidelines in each line office, as well as a lot of labs and programs that inform how publications need to be handled, as well as data sets. And there are some items that sort of blur the line between publication and data set. Next slide. So if you're publishing a journal article, there's some additional considerations when determining where to publish and how. Obviously, you want to publish in the best and most appropriate journal for your research, but you also have to decide if you want to publish open access, and if so, what type of open access. It can be a very complicated process. Publishing is also a fairly costly and complicated endeavor. There's article publishing charges, or APCs, as well as other fees, and all of it varies widely by publisher, title from each publisher, article status, and other considerations like subscriptions that your institution has. And there are advantages and disadvantages to all these choices. Open access makes your research more widely available, but it can also be cost prohibitive. So smaller programs and individuals are at a bit of a disadvantage. Then there are predatory journals. You want to avoid these, but they can be difficult to spot and can ultimately harm your reputation if you publish in them, and sort of damage your research long term. Next slide. So with gray literature, there's a whole different set of considerations. If you're publishing a NOAA report as part of a series, you need to make sure that you have the series title and numbers correct, all the different features like the cover page, all that. If the series doesn't exist yet and you want to start one, there are guidelines to follow that might vary by line office, but are also informed by various administrative orders that do things like define the difference between tech memos and tech reports, and which process of approval and review you need to go through. You then have to figure out how and where to post that report. Historically, NOAA has often published reports on the web pages of publishing offices, but sites go down and links change, which we've seen happen a number of times. And this is a big problem for long-term accessibility. It can also be difficult for people to find things because you need to know which office to go to. And there are records and management schedules and NARA requirements that apply to all publications, as we are a federal agency. And additionally, you may want a DOI assigned to your publication. DOIs provide a permanent link that even if your paper moves from one website to another, that link remains, and it aids in citation and retrieval of the document. Next page. Thank you. So I've just raised a lot of issues and questions without actually offering any answers, but the first of our new announcements is that we've just rolled out a publications and scholarly communications guide on our website that does answer all these questions and a lot more. We provide information on everything from the applicable policies to how to establish a series, different types of open access and what the advantages and disadvantages of those are, copyright information that would apply to your publication, and a lot of other services that we're able to provide. We are able to help at every stage of the publication life cycle. And we're happy to do so. So if you want to check that out, we strongly encourage you to do so. We tried to answer our most frequently asked questions and a lot more. So next slide. So this is an IR seminar, so we should talk about the IR. What is it? I think most of us know by now, but just in case, it's a digital library of scientific literature and research produced by NOAA. The library established and maintains the IR in accordance to the NOAA PAR plan, which was in turn drafted in response to a 2013 White House Office of Science and Technology policy memo that mandated that federally funded research be made publicly available. We have been live for a couple years now and made great strides in making NOAA's research available to the public. Next slide. So we get a fair bit of confusion about why is the IR different than the NOAA library holdings. So the library manages the IR, we've built it, we maintain it, but it's not the same collection. The IR is electronic items only. It's only things produced by NOAA. For NOAA's series publications and reports, we have everything we can back to 1970 to the present, and a very small handful of predecessor documents. And for journal articles, we have 2015 to present. It's only things that were authored or funded by NOAA. It's curated by collection. It's very specific to the NOAA structure. So all the finding aids are based on how NOAA functions and funds research. The library includes a lot of historical materials, many of which are digitized and are available through our catalog and our website. So there is that digital component to the library holdings, but they are separate from the IR. Next slide. So where does the repository fit into the publishing process? We're really that sort of tail end of publishing for dissemination and discovery, storing for archiving and long-term preservation, but also as a discovery tool for finding references. So we make the publications available, which fulfills requirements, but it also is a research tool that we hope that our researchers are using for their publications. Next slide. So we like to think there are a lot of benefits to the IR. Number one, and definitely the least sexy, is that it meets your PAR requirements. These requirements apply to everyone at NOAA and NOAA grantees, and meeting them is as simple as submitting your research paper to the IR. We count office and agency compliance, and we're making it easier and easier for people. So we're really willing to work with you to do what needs to be done to get your documents into the IR. We want to help you make them available. We're also able to fulfill NARA requirements for documents. Again, federally published documents are subject to record schedules and NARA requirements. Tech memos, tech reports, other series publications sent to the IR will be sent to NARA. So we'll take care of that requirement for you. On sort of a more fun note, being in the IR does increase the visibility of your research. The IR is Google indexed. It's also easy to find through any other search engine you may be using. So in our testing, documents usually show up in the top 5 results. In the IR version does when we've searched for them. So people are able to find those documents a lot easier. And then once in the IR, next page. All right, documents in the IR are linked. They're linked to other documents within the IR that are related, either through the office, the subject, the author, but also to funded information, available data sets, web pages related to projects. We really try to make a web of information connected to your publication. And additionally, there's that DOI assignment. All publications, all NOAA publications that are submitted to the IR are assigned a DOI. This, again, helps with citation and accessibility of your document. Okay, and with that, I'm going to hand it over to Jen to talk about actually submitting your publication to the IR and making it available.
Thank you, Sarah. So, like Sarah said, with that, we'll talk about submissions, and just something briefly that I forgot to mention before Sarah started, and I apologize. If you have questions while we're going through any of this information, please feel free to add them to the question the question panel in the GoToMeetings or in the chat box. Katie Rowley is monitoring that for us right now. And so if she's able to, she'll answer those questions for you. And if not, we will try to go through them at the end. And if we don't get to them, we'll always email you an answer. So with that, like Sarah said, we're going to talk about submitting to the IR. But the biggest question that we get often is, what am I even supposed to submit? There's a lot of information that you just dumped on me. I don't even know what I'm supposed to submit. So what we've done is we've created what we call the IR document policy. I do have it linked here in the slides, which will be available for everyone. And within the document policy, we sort of lay out what is required to be submitted, and then what additional documents the library has opted to accept into the repository. In addition to that, we also in the policy have a list of exclusions, so things that we do not take. I will say, if your item is on that list of exclusions, contact us. Just because it doesn't go in the IR doesn't mean we can't help you find a permanent home for that item. So the primary 2 things that we focus on with the repository are journal articles. So as Sarah mentioned, anything published after 2015 for the journal articles. And then we also look at NOAA publications. Again, we can take the NOAA publications going all the way back to 1970, all the way through the present ones. The current and present ones are primarily our focus, but we do like to have a place where we can gather up all of those old historical documents, since there isn't one location to locate them. So when it comes to journal articles, as I said, they are published after 2015. There are, and I just want to mention, this is sort of kind of a how to submit, but we'll get into that in a little more detail in just a minute. You can provide us with a list of publication citations. So at the end of every fiscal year, if you want to send us an Excel spreadsheet of your publication citations, what we can do is go through, the IR staff will go through and review those, and we will notify you what is open access and what we can just handle on our own, and what items would require a manuscript. And then what I have on here is what manuscript was. So when we refer to a manuscript, we're talking about the post-print or post-refereed. And that terminology is a little confusing for people. So I wanted to put a place in here where we define that. So when we talk about a post-print or a post-refereed document, but before publisher editions, this is what we're discussing. We're talking about a manuscript draft that's been peer reviewed, but it lacks that publisher's content. So it doesn't have the pagination, it doesn't have publisher logos. Those are the things that we are looking to include in the IR. So either the open access version or publisher's version or these manuscripts. When it comes to your NOAA publications, we need that final publication. We do not accept draft plans or draft versions of documents. So for your tech memos, your professional papers, and atlas, the strategic plans, so on and so forth, we need the final version of that. So just to be a little more detailed about the requirements of things that you're submitting to us, they have to be in PDF format. Unfortunately, that's what our system requires for our main documents to be a PDF. If your item has a supporting file, let's say it has a data set that you'd like to include or a link to a data set. Let's say you have a PowerPoint that you want to attach to that article. We can include those as supporting files, but the main document does need to be a PDF document. We cannot accept videos for any sort of supporting material at this time unless it is hosted on a web page. So unfortunately, videos are not accepted. And everything that comes to us has to be Section 508 compliant. So I'm not sure if anyone joined us last week Friday, but myself and Jamie Roberts did a webinar about 508 compliance and how we check for 508 compliance when you submit to us, and also what are the main things to focus on. So I have linked here, we've created a Section 508 LibGuide, which hopefully people have utilized. It lists on that LibGuide our big 5 requirements, the main points and things that we check for when we check for compliance. This requirement is for all NOAA publications. So your tech memos, your strategic plans, your biological opinions, those things have to be Section 508 compliant. Open access journals are exempt from these 508 requirements. So if you published, let's say 10 articles, and all of them are in open access journals, whether you paid for the open access or it's a straight up open access journal, whatever it may be. You do not have to worry about making that PDF 508 compliant because we can use the publisher's version. So if we can use a publisher's version of a document for your article, you don't have to worry about 508 requirements for that. However, journal article manuscripts do need to be 508 compliant. So we realize that this is difficult because not only are we asking you to find that manuscript, to find the manuscript that was reviewed but is lacking that publisher information, but we're also asking you to make it compliant, 508 compliant. And we understand that's a lot of work. We do. We feel that pain ourselves. We have to do similar things. It is a time suck. It is it requires a lot of resources. And so for the past year or so, we've been trying to figure out a way that we can help you with that, which is why I have a little asterisk here. So what we did to try to ease some of this pain in terms of 508 is we actually were able to secure a small amount of additional funding from a few resources to try out a pilot program. And for this pilot program, we in the Central Library will provide your Section 508 remediation for your journal article manuscripts. I'm just going to say that one more time. We'll provide your 508 work and remediation for the journal article manuscripts. At this time, because as I said, we were only able to secure funding for a pilot project on this, we're just focusing on journal article manuscripts. So if you have a tech memo, I'm sorry, you still have to do the 508 on that. But if you have 10 journal articles and 5 are open access and 5 you have a manuscript for, but you don't have them in 508 compliant format, send us those manuscripts, those 5 manuscripts, and we'll make those 508 compliant for you. So what we've done is we've set up a form. It is linked here. It is our remediation request form. When you go to that form, it's going to look very much like our submission form because what you are doing, in fact, is submitting your document to us. So you can submit your manuscript to us. we will do the 508 compliance on it, and it will be considered as submitted to the repository, so it will count towards your compliance. If you have open access articles, those can still be submitted in the normal format. You don't have to send them to the separate form. This form is particularly and specifically for those items that we are offering, that we will be providing the 508 work on. So I'm certain there's a bunch of questions about that, and we're gonna try to leave enough time at the end so that we can go over that a little bit more. So I want to cover briefly the submission methods, which many of you are already aware of. We do have the submission form, which I just mentioned. So that's what you're going to use for your tech memos, any of your NOAA produced NOAA series publications, or your open access journal articles. We can do a single document, a batch item. It does require a NOAA.gov email address. So if you do not have a NOAA.gov email address, say for our partners in the cooperative institutes or cooperative science centers, they can also email those submissions to us to NOAA.repository@NOAA.gov. Again, you can submit a single document, you can submit batch documents. In both forms, you can also submit a list of articles and publications for the library team to review. And as I mentioned earlier, we'll go through your list. We'll let you know what we can take as open access, what requires a manuscript, and then you can provide those manuscripts to us through the remediation form, and then we'll do the 508 on those manuscripts and then get those into the repository for you. There are two other options for submitting to the repository, and both of these are relatively new. The first one is through RPTS, the Research Publication Tracking System that was developed by NIMS and is used throughout most of NIMS, but also OAR. A number of offices in OAR are starting to adopt the system, and I know NESDIS and I believe NOS are both on board to eventually sign on with this particular software. Within RPTS, there is a direct submission. So it's essentially, I'm not going to call it one click, but I am going to say one click, where you can click on a button and say, yes, I want to submit this to the IR. It'll ask you like 2 little questions. You check mark those boxes. It'll send it directly to us in the repository email. 508 compliance rules do apply. So if you have a tech memo in RPTS and you want to send it to us, it does still need to be 508 compliant. And then when it comes to the manuscripts, those will be filtered appropriately as well. And then if you are with fisheries, we also have a submission process through their eco tracking system for biological opinions. So we are actively trying to find easier ways for everyone to submit their documents to us. So before we take questions, we kind of ran over a ton of things. We sort of provided you with some new info and some new products and services that we're offering. So what I wanted to do, what Sarah and I did, is we created sort of a quick list of everything that we've gone over for everyone, just so you can quickly reference it. So on here we have the Publishing and Scholarly Communications Guide. We have our journal manuscript remediation form. We have a link to the submission form. And then I also included a link to our previous IR presentations that we've done. The library does have a YouTube channel, and we post all of our brown bags on that YouTube channel. And we have a specific playlist for anything that has to do with the IR, any brown bag presentation we've given. We have a playlist for that. We also have one for Section 508 compliance. So if you follow this link, it'll take you to all the playlists that the library has to offer. I also have a link here to the DOI request form so that people can easily find that. And then I want to highlight one more new thing. If you joined us for our 508 webinar last week, you will know that we have established NOAA IR and Section 508 office hours. And what I mean by office hours is every Tuesday, starting next Tuesday, May 19th, from 2 p.m. to 3:30 p.m. Eastern Time, we will have a drop-in, drop-out Google Hangout. So if you follow this link and go into the Google Hangout, you will run into most likely me. And I can answer, or Sarah might be joining us sometimes, Jamie or Jan, who handle the submissions that I'm sure many of you have spoken with. Or will soon speak with as you submit things to us. And we're going to be there so that we can answer your questions. It's sort of a drop in, drop out format. You can come in, be like, hey, I have a question. I'm not sure how to fix this problem with my tech memo in terms of 508. What do I do? Or, I want to submit something, but I'm not sure. It doesn't say on your list if you take this item or not. You can pop in, ask us that question, and then you can move on with the rest of your day. We wanted to try to make ourselves as available as possible so that people can get some of those real quick answers, those questions that have quick answers answered in a timely fashion and not have to wait around for email. And especially for those that are on an opposite coast, sometimes you get your question in and it's late in the day for us on the East Coast, so on and so forth. So just another easy way for you to get in touch with us and get some answers. And then I just want to highlight, since this is a new series, we do have our next 4 sessions scheduled. So next month we'll be talking about open access. In July, we are going to talk about predatory publishing. August, we are going to talk about tech memos and how to start NOAA series, which I'm very excited about. And then in September, we are going to talk about the IR specifically again. And what we're going to do is look at the IR as a research tool. So Sarah was talking about the full publishing cycle and process and how, everything sort of starts and ends with that research, using an item for research, and how the IR fulfills that role in both ways. So that's what we're going to cover in September. So with that, I'm going to stop and see, Katie, are there some questions? Do we have time for questions?
We have a ton of questions, which I hope you have some time for.
I do. I'm not sure how we're doing on time or how long I talked. So,
We've got
but
about a
I am
half an
happy to answer okay, we have tons of time. So let's kick through them, as many as we can.
hour. Okay. First up, there is the NOAA IR, and then there's libraries, the central library, and then there's individual center libraries. How do they relate and interact with each other? If you're going to submit a publication to the IR, should we also submit it to the library or our center's library?
That's a great question. So within NOAA, there is the central library, and then we have a number of regional libraries, there are lab libraries, office libraries as well. And we call that the NOAA Library Network. So we do work very closely with all of those librarians. A lot of them actually help their labs submit things to the repository. So when we talk about submitting to the IR, oftentimes people will say you need to submit this to the library, and generally they mean to the repository. So that's sort of why we wanted to go through that slide and sort of show you the difference when you talk about the IR versus the library. While the library manages the IR, it's not the same as submitting it to the library. So
So you don't have to submit it to the library as well as the IR.
exactly. So you would just be submitting it to the IR. You don't have to submit it to your regional library. You don't have to submit it to the central library, just to the IR.
Perfect. Next question.
Yes.
For NOAA-funded studies that are published or written by non-NOAA researchers, what do you recommend is the best way to get the right version of the manuscript? Have you seen a particular process from program managers that works best?
That's a great question. So we have worked pretty closely with our cooperative institutes. Um, the first thing we do, and the first thing I would recommend for program managers, and this has worked really well with with the cooperative institutes, is we have them, usually those funder, the people who receive funds have to do some sort of report, and they at least say, hey, these are the publications that we produced based on the funding that you provided us. I think the best place, and what's worked really well for us so far, has been having those programs and offices provide us with that full list of citations and say, these are all of the publications that our office funded and produced. What we would do in the library is we would go through all of those publications and figure out what's open access, what we can just handle for you. And then we would let you know what needs a manuscript. From there, we would work with you and the grantee to acquire that manuscript. I know in the past, essentially what has happened is program managers have reached out to the author directly. Sometimes that is not always feasible. It can be tricky. It can be real tricky. And what we try to do is figure out what's going to work best for you, your program, and for your authors as well. It I don't have a real firm or great answer. I think the best place to start is getting us that list of publications, and we can go through that with you and figure out exactly what we even need to focus on in terms of getting a manuscript. We don't want you to waste your time trying to get a manuscript for an item that we can just use the publisher's version for. We don't want you to spend your time doing that. That seems like a waste. And we can handle that workload for you. So starting with getting us a list and then moving from there, I think is probably one of the best ways to start.
Great, thank you. Okay, and the next question is a little bit of a two-parter. Could you provide more clarification on why the IR would make public a published journal article without the journal's formatting, especially if most things only have a 1 to 2 year embargo period?
So there are a number of journals. That's a great question. So the reason that we ask for manuscripts is technically PAR says that a manuscript has to be provided to the repository, not that we can use a publisher's version. In PAR, it technically says a manuscript. That aside, one of the other reasons is there's a number of publishers that do not ever allow us to use their publisher's version in the repository. Even after embargo periods. Oftentimes embargo periods just mean that we can actually post your manuscript, not the publisher's version. Um, Sometimes after a certain period of time, usually it's roughly 5 years is the average. There's some exceptions. You can switch from a manuscript version in your repository over uh, to the publisher's version. But for that 5 years, that item's oftentimes behind a paywall and people can't access it. So that would be why we would ask for that manuscript. We didn't include it in here, but there is a really wonderful tool that we use and we've talked about in great length within our publications group. It's called Sherpa Romeo. And I don't know if Katie or Sarah want to drop that link to Sherpa Romeo in the chat for everyone. Sherpa Romeo is a resource where you can look up a journal by title, by ISSN. You can also look up just a publisher in general, and you can see all of their copyright policies, and it'll tell you right in there if we can use a manuscript for our repository, how long the embargo period is, if there is an embargo period, if we can never use a publisher's version, and there are some journals that do not allow us to ever use their version. I will say we always link to the publisher's version. That's what's called a version of record, a VOR. For any of these documents. So whether it's a manuscript or the publisher's version itself, we always link to them via the DOI. So hopefully that explains that a little bit more, why we require a manuscript for certain items. And again, that's only certain items.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the main concern was that sometimes a manuscript seems kind of skeptical. You'd rather cite something that looks, professional and coming from a journal, but that
Absolutely.
shouldn't be a concern.
Absolutely. And that's a good point. And that's one of the reasons we always work hard to make sure we are linking to that version of record so that you can have that sort of backup and know that this manuscript links to this final version. And if you can access that final version, that's great. But to be able to have that sort of post-refereed, which is why we ask for that version of the manuscript, is because it's as close to the final version as possible.
Great, thank you. Our next question is there a repository for poster presentations, PDFs, so that people could access the PDF instead of bringing hard copies to a conference, for example?
That is a great idea. Within NOAA, there is not one that I know of. unfortunately. Sarah, I don't know if you know of any additional places where there may be something like that, but at this point in time, I do not know of one.
I do not. I would agree that it is something that would be very beneficial, particularly since in theory all poster presentations and all conference presentations should be going through FRC, and making them available would be beneficial to everyone. So maybe we should ask someone about that.
I actually think that's a great thing that maybe we will take up with some folks. Thank you.
Yeah.
That's a great idea.
Okay, next question. Does the one click from RPTS link to the 508 remediation option?
So currently it does not. Um, so I will give everyone forewarning. Currently it does not. We work very closely with the RPTS folks, and we do need to set up that finalized linking. So that is something that will be in process. As soon as we have that available, we will let everyone know. So unfortunately, if your journal manuscript is in RPTS, for the time being, you will have to use that outside form, but we are going to work with our PTS to get that set up. So we didn't want to keep this on hold while we worked with them. We wanted to be able to make this available for as many people as possible. So it will be in the works. Currently, it just sends it to the regular submission form. So
Great.
that's a wonderful distinction. Thank you, whoever asked that question. I'm glad we were able to make that distinction right now. It will be there, just not quite yet.
Got it. A couple more questions.
Mhm.
For older biological opinions that were finalized before ECO, can we submit through the submission form?
So that is a good question, and I am going to defer on that right this second. I'd like to double check. We've worked really closely with the Office of Protected Resources on ECO, and I know that there has been some confusion and a little bit of conflicting information about how to submit those older, I think it's pre-2018 biological opinions, whether they're supposed to come through ECO or whether they're supposed to go through the submission form. There's a little bit of confusion, so I'd like to maybe defer on that question and then directly respond to that person offline.
Right. Okay, last question so far. Will you do the 508 for journal manuscripts for NOAA-funded research written by external authors, or does it have to be requested by NOAA authors?
We will do it for funded if it's submitted by the office, by the program, by the funding office. Yes. If it's a journal article manuscript, we will do the 508 compliance for it. Yes.
Great, thank you. And I believe that is not the end. Next, I think this is more of a comment, but some folks in my center are looking into that with the idea for a poster repository that we could print a QR code on the poster that would take folks to the PDF. I can put you in contact if that's helpful.
That would be wonderful. Yeah, that sounds really interesting. I will say that when it comes to posters and stuff, if they're tied to a publication, we are happy to include those posters as a supplementary document or supporting file in the repository. I know that doesn't necessarily serve the same purpose, but it is yet another way to sort of make sure all aspects of your research are sort of grouped together.
Great. Next question. Should all final reports from grantees be submitted to the NOAA IR?
Oh, fine. Yeah. Okay. So just to clarify, whoever asked that question, in terms of final reports, you mean, uh, so from my understanding, a lot of grantees throughout the process and over the course of their grant, they put in progress reports and everything, and then there's a final report, sort of relaying what they did, what the final outcomes were, that sort of stuff. Yes, the final reports. We don't generally take the progress reports, but the final reports, yes, we would take. And again, those would have to fall under that 508. They would have to be 508 compliant.
Right. Next, Why isn't the IR accepting journal articles prior to 2015?
So PAR says we don't have to. PAR only required that we did things after technically October 1, 2015, but we just say all of 2015, that's fine. Starting in FY16 is when the requirements started. That being said, we don't generally take anything prior to 2015 because much like everyone else, we just don't have the resources to process all of that. On average, Sarah, correct me if I'm wrong, NOAA produces thousands of articles each year, and for us to go backwards and try to acquire and find all of those would be a daunting task, to say the least. And we
Yes.
don't want to make more work for you folks either, because unfortunately some of those we would have to get a manuscript for. And if, what are the chances people are going to be able to locate a manuscript from 2012 or 10 even? So because PAR said that this is the start date, we figured it was easiest, A, for us, but B, for programs, offices, and authors themselves to only have to worry about 2015 forward. And essentially at this point, we just want people to really focus on from this point forward. That
Yes.
is our biggest focus. We
I
know that it
think,
can be daunting to think all the way back to like, oh gosh, now I got to find all these manuscripts going back to 2015. Nah, it's cool. We'll work with you. Um, we want to make this as easy as possible, and we just want to make sure as much research is available to the public as possible. So like from this point forward is where we want people to focus on. When it comes to the older and more historical things, we'll work with you. Well, we can have those conversations and discuss what's the best route for those.
Okay, next question. If you had published in the fishery bulletin, do they need to submit the article to the NOAA IR, or is this done automatically?
it is not done automatically. You should still submit it to the IR. Not everything in Fishery Bulletin is published by NOAA authors or NOAA funded authors, so we aren't just scraping it right now.
Okay. I think that is the end of our questions. We do have about 10 minutes to spare if you guys have anything else you would like to inform our audience about.
Nope, I don't think so. I will say if you have additional questions, please contact us. We are here to help you. Um, I am happy to always, and Sarah as well, we are always happy to come to your office and speak to your staff. We are happy to do webinars, easy, as painless as possible.
Okay, great. I think that's the end of our questions. I'm going to close
Right.
this now for everyone. So thank you for joining us. I hope you all have a safe and healthy day and weekend coming up. Thank you.